Hi, I'm Claire. And 3 months ago, I was lying on a beach in Belize, completely alone, while my husband of exactly 4 days had vanished without a trace. The resort staff kept asking if I needed help finding him, their voices getting more concerned each time. But here's the thing. Nobody tells you about betrayal. Sometimes the worst part isn't what they did. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. It's realizing how long they'd been planning it while you were picking out wedding flowers and dreaming about forever. Those credit card statements didn't just reveal where David had been. They revealed who he'd always been. And now, as I sit in the home I rebuilt from scratch, watching him beg through my doorbell camera for another chance, I can't help but smile. Because the woman who flew home alone from that honeymoon isn't the same one answering the door today. The morning everything changed started like any other perfect honeymoon day. I woke up in our ocean view suite at the seaside resort and spa, the sound of waves gently lapping against the shore below our balcony. Sunlight streamed through the white cotton curtains, painting everything in that golden hue that makes vacation photos look like postcards. David was already up, standing on the balcony with his coffee, his dark hair catching the morning breeze. For a moment, watching him silhouetted against the turquoise water, I felt that deep contentment that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're supposed to be with exactly the right person. "Good morning, Mrs. Martinez," he said without turning around, and I could hear the smile in his voice. Even after 4 days of marriage, hearing my new name still sent a little thrill through me. We'd been together for 3 years, but this felt different. Official, permanent. I padded over to him in my silk pajamas, the tile cool under my bare feet, and wrapped my arms around his waist from behind. "What's the plan today, Mr. Martinez?" I asked, breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne mixed with the salt air. He leaned back into me, solid and warm, and for a second everything felt perfectly right. "Actually," he said, turning in my arms, "I need to handle something. For work this morning. You know how Johnson gets when projects sit too long." He kissed my forehead gently. "Why don't you hit the spa? Get that massage you've been talking about? I'll be back by lunch and we can do the snorkeling tour." I pulled back slightly, studying his face. "Work? David, we're on our honeymoon. Can't Johnson survive a few more days without you?" There was something in his expression I couldn't quite read, a tightness around his eyes that hadn't been there the night before when we'd fallen asleep tangled together after making love on the balcony under the stars. "It's just a quick call, babe. 2 hours max. Then I'm all yours for the rest of the trip." He cupped my face in his hands, his thumbs tracing my cheekbones. "I promise. This is the last time work interrupts us." I wanted to argue, wanted to point out that we'd specifically told everyone we'd be unreachable for the week, but something in his tone made me nod instead. Maybe it was the way he was looking at me, almost pleading, or maybe it was just the honeymoon glow making me more agreeable than usual. "Okay," I said, "but you owe me an extra good snorkeling tour." "Deal." He kissed me then, soft and lingering, and I let myself sink into it. When we broke apart, he rested his forehead against mine. "I love you, Claire. More than you know." "I love you too," I whispered back, meaning it completely. An hour later, I watched from our balcony as David walked across the resort lobby. Below, his laptop bag slung over his shoulder. He moved with purpose, checking his phone as he headed toward the main entrance. I figured he was going to find somewhere quiet to take his call, maybe the business center or one of the poolside cabanas. The resort was beautiful, but not exactly soundproof when you needed to focus. I spent the morning exactly as suggested, letting the spa staff pamper me with a deep tissue massage and a facial that left my skin glowing. The masseuse, a gentle woman named Rosa, kept commenting on how relaxed I seemed. "Honeymoon bliss," she said with a knowing smile, and I laughed. Agreeing? If only I'd known then that David wasn't in some quiet corner of the resort handling Johnson's latest crisis. If only I'd known he was already 40 minutes away, driving a rental car I didn't know he'd arranged, heading toward a part of Belize I'd never heard of. By the time I finished at the spa, it was nearly noon. I walked back to our suite, expecting to find David freshly showered and ready for our afternoon adventure. Instead, I found an empty room and a text message that made my stomach drop. Work emergency got complicated. Going to take longer than expected. Start lunch without me. Love you. I stared at the message, reading it 3 times. Something felt off about it, though I couldn't put my finger on what. David was thorough about his work, sometimes annoyingly so, but he'd never let a client interrupt something this important to us. We'd talked about it extensively while planning the wedding. No work, no distractions, just us and this paradise for 7 uninterrupted days. I tried calling him. It went straight to voicemail. I tried again an hour later. Same thing. By 3 o'clock, when our snorkeling tour was supposed to start, I was sitting on our bed staring at my phone, a cold knot of anxiety growing in my chest. That's when I started doing what any worried wife would do. I began retracing his steps, asking questions, trying to piece together where he might have gone. The concierge, a friendly man named Miguel, who'd helped us plan our activities, looked confused when I described David's work emergency. Mr. Martinez didn't mention any business center reservation to me, Miguel said, checking his computer. And I don't see any record of him using our services today. Are you sure he didn't go to the beach, perhaps? Sometimes guests think better near the water. The beach was empty, except for a few families and couples lounging under umbrellas. No David. I checked the poolside cabanas, the restaurant terraces, even the fitness center. Nothing. By evening, when I was supposed to be getting ready for the sunset dinner cruise we'd booked, I was fighting full panic. That's when I made the decision that changed everything. I went to the front desk and asked them to help me understand David's departure. The desk clerk, a young woman with kind eyes, pulled up our account and frowned. Mrs. Martinez, I see here that your husband checked out a rental car this morning at 9:30, a white Jeep Cherokee. He said it was for a surprise day trip for your honeymoon. She looked up at me, clearly reading the confusion on my face. You didn't know about the car? No, I said quietly. I didn't know about the car. The room started to feel smaller. A surprise day trip that he'd told me was a work emergency. A rental car he'd arranged without mentioning it. Phone calls going straight to voicemail when he was supposedly in meetings that should have ended hours ago. None of it made sense, and all of it made perfect, terrible sense at the same time. I spent that night alone in our honeymoon suite, jumping every time I heard footsteps in the hallway, checking my phone obsessively, calling David's number until I'd worn myself out with the sound of his cheerful voicemail greeting. You've reached David Martinez. Leave a message and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Each time I heard it, his voice sounded more like a stranger's. By morning, when David still hadn't returned and hadn't answered a single one of my 17 text messages, I knew I had to make a choice. I could sit in that beautiful room, paralyzed by confusion and fear, waiting for him to come back with some explanation that would make this all make sense. Or I could start looking for answers myself. I chose answers. That's how I found myself in the resort's business center at 8 a.m., logging into our joint bank account for the first time in months. David had always handled our finances. He was better with numbers, he said, more organized about tracking expenses and maximizing our savings. I'd been happy to let him take care of it, focusing instead on my graphic design work and planning our future together. Now, staring at the screen as our account information loaded, I realized how naive that trust had been. The first thing I noticed was a charge from the day before. Car rental, Belize Auto Services, $320. Not exactly a quick work call expense. Then I saw another charge from 2 days ago that made my breath catch. Flores Airport, pay 10. Province, Guatemala, $450 for what looked like a private charter flight. Guatemala. David had flown to Guatemala while I thought he was handling a work emergency in our resort. My hands started shaking as I scrolled further back through the statements, and that's when the real nightmare began. Charge after charge, going back months, to places I'd never been and didn't recognize. Hotels in cities we'd never visited together. Restaurants where I'd definitely never eaten. And then, the one that made my entire world tilt sideways. Gemstone. Jewelry, Beverly Hills. $15,000. Dated 3 weeks before our wedding. I stared at that charge until the numbers burned into my vision. $15,000 on jewelry that I'd never seen, never received, never even heard him mention. My engagement ring had cost $3,000. My wedding band was another $1,000. Where was the $15,000 piece of jewelry? And who was wearing it? That's when I started printing everything. Every statement, every suspicious charge, every piece of evidence that my marriage was built on a foundation I'd never known existed. The business center printer hummed quietly as page after page of betrayal accumulated in the output tray. 3 months of charges to places I'd never been. Hotels booked on weekends when David had told me he was visiting his sick grandmother in Phoenix. Flights to cities he'd never mentioned traveling to for work. And then I found the one that broke me completely. Flores Airport, Petén Province, Guatemala. Not just the charge from 2 days ago, but another one. And another, and another. Going back 8 months, always on the same pattern. Always when he'd told me he was somewhere else entirely. I sat in that sterile business center, surrounded by the gentle hum of computers and the distant sound of other guests starting their perfect vacation days, and realized that the man I'd married 4 days ago had been living a double life for most of our relationship. The David who brought me coffee in bed and planned surprise dates and talked about the house we'd buy and the children we'd have was the same David who'd been secretly flying to Guatemala every few months, spending money. We'd saved together on a life I knew nothing about. The worst part wasn't even the deception, though that felt like a physical wound in my chest. The worst part was the calculation of it all. The way he'd looked me in the eyes and told me about business emergencies and sick relatives and work, trips while he was actually maintaining an entire separate existence. The way he'd kissed me goodbye the morning before, promising it was just a quick call, knowing he was about to disappear for what was looking like an indefinite amount of time. I printed the last statement and gathered all the papers into a neat stack. Outside the business center windows, I could see other honeymooners walking hand in hand toward the beach, ready to start another day in paradise. I watched a young couple laughing as they tried to coordinate their snorkeling gear, the woman playfully splashing her new husband as they entered the crystal-clear water. That should have been David and me. Yesterday, tomorrow, for the rest of our lives. Instead, I was sitting alone with a pile of evidence that my entire relationship had been a carefully constructed lie. I looked at my phone one more time. Still no messages from David. Still no explanation for where he'd gone, or when he might come back. For all I knew, he wasn't planning to come back at all. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Maybe this was how he'd planned to end things from the beginning. A honeymoon disappearance that would let him slip away into whatever life he'd been building in Guatemala while I flew home alone, confused and heartbroken, and none the wiser about the scope of his betrayal. But I wasn't going to let that happen. Not anymore. I had evidence now. I had proof that this wasn't some terrible misunderstanding or work emergency gone wrong. This was deliberate, calculated deception that had been going on for most of our relationship. And if David thought he could just vanish without facing the consequences of what he'd done, he was about to learn exactly how wrong he was. I folded the printed statements carefully and slipped them into my beach bag. Then I walked out of that business center with my head held high, ready to figure out exactly who my husband really was and what he'd been doing with our money, our trust, and our shared life. The woman who'd woken up yesterday morning as a blissful newlywed was gone. In her place was someone harder, someone who'd been forced to grow up in the space of 24 hours, someone who wasn't going to sit quietly while her life was destroyed by lies. David had no idea what was coming for him, but he was about to find out. The call to Amanda came at 6 in the morning, Belize time. I'd been awake for hours, sitting on the balcony watching the sunrise paint the ocean in shades of gold and coral. The stack of printed bank statements spread across the small table like evidence at a crime scene. My best friend's voice was thick with sleep when she answered, but it sharpened immediately when she heard mine. "Claire, what's wrong? Aren't you supposed to be blissfully unreachable right now?" "David's gone," I said, and hearing the words out loud made them feel more real, more terrifying. "He left yesterday morning and hasn't come back. And Amanda, I found things, financial things that don't make sense." There was a pause, then the sound of Amanda sitting up in bed. I could picture her in her suburban Portland home, probably in the oversized Oregon State sweatshirt she'd worn to bed since college, her blonde hair sticking up at odd angles. What kind of things? Charges to places we've never been together. Flights to Guatemala going back months. A $15,000 jewelry purchase 3 weeks before our wedding that I've never seen. My voice cracked slightly on the last part. "Amanda, I think he's been living a double life." Holy shit! Amanda was wide awake now. "Claire, honey, slow down. Tell me everything from the beginning." So I did. I told her about David's supposed work emergency, about the rental car I didn't know he'd gotten, about spending the night alone calling his phone over and over until my thumb was raw from dialing. I told her about the bank statements and the pattern of deception they revealed, about the cold realization that the man I'd married was a stranger. "Okay," Amanda said when I finished, her voice taking on the practical tone she used when she was solving problems. "First question. Are you safe where you are?" "I think so. The resort staff has been wonderful, and there's no indication that David is in any kind of danger or that I am either. He just left." "Good. Second question. Do you want to come home, or do you want to figure out what the hell is going on down there?" I looked out at the ocean, at the paradise that was supposed to be the beginning of our forever, now tainted by betrayal and lies. "I want to know the truth. All of it." "Then let's get you some help. I'm going to make some calls, see if I can track down a private investigator in Belize, someone who can help you figure out where David went and what he's really been doing with these trips to Guatemala." The relief that flooded through me was so intense I almost started crying. For the first time since David had walked out of our suite, I felt like I wasn't completely alone. "Thank you. I don't know what I'd do without you." "You'd figure it out, because you're stronger than you think. But you don't have to do it alone." Amanda paused. "Claire, I have to ask. Has there been anything else? Any other signs that something was off?" I thought about it. Really thought about it, forcing myself to look past the romantic haze I'd been living in for the past 3 years. "There were things," I admitted. Small things I explained away, like how he never wanted me to go with him on work trips, even the ones to cities I'd love to visit, or how he was always weird about leaving his phone around, even though he said it was just because of work confidentiality. And now that I think about it, he was always the one who handled our finances. He said he was better with numbers, and I was happy to let him take care of it. "Classic control behavior," Amanda said grimly. "Keep the partner in the dark about money so they can't see the inconsistencies." "What about his family? Have you talked to them recently?" "Not since the wedding. His parents live in Seattle and we don't talk to them much. His sister moved to Denver last year for work." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Amanda, what if they don't know about me? What if I'm not the only wife? Let's not jump to that conclusion yet, but we need to consider all possibilities. I'm going to start making those calls. In the meantime, you need to document everything. Take photos of all those bank statements, save every text and voicemail. From David, write down everything you remember about his behavior leading up to this trip. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity that felt almost therapeutic after the helpless waiting of the previous day. I photographed every page of the bank statements, uploaded them to a cloud storage account Amanda and I shared, and started a detailed timeline of David's suspicious behavior going back as far as I could remember. It was during this process that I started noticing patterns I'd missed before. The Guatemala trips always happened after periods when David seemed stressed or distracted. He'd become more affectionate in the days leading up to each disappearance, almost as if he was overcompensating for something. And afterward, when he'd return from what he claimed were work trips or family visits, he'd be different. Calmer. But also more distant, like part of him was still somewhere else. By noon, Amanda called back with news. I found someone. Her name is Detective Rosa Herrera, former police but now private investigation. She's based in Belize City but works all over the country. She speaks perfect English and has experience with missing persons cases. More importantly, she's available to meet with you today. How much is this going to cost? I asked, thinking about our joint savings account and wondering how much of it was actually mine versus money David had been siphoning off for his secret life. Don't worry about that right now. I'm covering her retainer, and we'll figure out the rest later. The important thing is getting answers. Detective Herrera arrived at the resort that afternoon. A compact woman in her 40s with intelligent dark eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wore khakis and a white cotton shirt that somehow managed to look both professional and appropriate for the tropical climate. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to dealing with difficult situations. "Mrs. Martinez," she said, shaking my hand firmly as we settled into a quiet corner of the resort's lobby. "I've reviewed the preliminary information your friend provided. This is a complex situation, but not an uncommon one, unfortunately. Let's start with what you know for certain." I walked her through everything again, spreading the bank statements across the low table between us. Detective Herrera studied them with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen financial deception before, occasionally making notes in a small leather notebook. "These charges to Flores," she said, pointing to the Guatemala airport fees. "That's not a vacation destination. It's primarily a gateway to the archaeological sites, but also a hub for other activities in the Petén region. The pattern suggests your husband has been maintaining a regular presence there for some time." "What kind of activities?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Could be anything from legitimate archaeological work to less savory pursuits. "The region has various opportunities for someone looking to operate outside normal channels." She looked up at me. "Have you considered the possibility that your husband might be involved in something illegal?" The question hit me like a physical blow. Drug smuggling, artifact theft, money laundering, possibilities I'd never imagined swirled through my mind. No, I mean, David works in marketing for a tech company in Portland. He's never been involved in anything like that." "That you know of?" Detective Herrera said gently. "Mrs. Martinez, in my experience, when someone is leading a double life to this extent, the hidden life is usually very different from the public one. We need to prepare for the possibility that your husband is not who you thought he was." She agreed to start investigating immediately, beginning with tracking down the rental car David had taken and trying to determine his exact destination. In the meantime, she gave me specific instructions about how to handle any contact from David and what information to gather if he did return. "If he comes back, don't let on that you know about the financial irregularities yet," she advised. "Act concerned but not suspicious. Let him tell his story and document everything he says. Often the cover stories reveal as much as the truth." That evening, alone again in our honeymoon suite, I tried to follow Detective Herrera's advice and think like an investigator rather than a betrayed wife. I went through David's belongings methodically, looking for anything I might have missed. His suitcase contained the expected vacation clothes, toiletries, and books, but tucked into a side pocket of his laptop bag, I found something that made my hands tremble. A second passport, not a fake. It had David's photo and correct information, but it was a legitimate U.S. passport that had been issued 2 years ago, one I'd never seen before. The pages were filled with stamps from countries he'd never mentioned visiting. Guatemala, obviously, but also Honduras, El Salvador, and several other Central American nations. The most recent stamp was from just 6 months ago. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding this evidence of yet another layer of deception, and felt something shift inside me. The hurt and confusion I'd been carrying started transforming into something harder, more focused. David hadn't just disappeared on our honeymoon. He'd been systematically lying to me for years. The man I'd fallen in love with, the man I'd thought I was building a life with, was a fiction. My phone buzzed with a text message, and for a moment my heart leaped, thinking it might finally be David with some explanation that would make this nightmare make sense. Instead, it was from a number I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Martinez, this is Rosa Herrera. I have preliminary information about your husband's whereabouts. Can you meet me at the resort bar at 9 p.m.? Come alone and bring the passport you found." I stared at the message, wondering how she knew I'd found the passport. Then I realized she probably hadn't known. She'd just suspected I would if I looked carefully enough. The fact that she was right made me wonder what other secrets she expected me to uncover. At 9 p.m., I found Detective Herrera at a corner table in the resort's open-air bar, nursing what looked like club soda with lime. The evening crowd was light, mostly couples sharing romantic dinners and a few solo travelers reading at the bar. Steel drum music played softly in the background, the cheerful sound at odds with the serious expression on the detective's face. "You found it," she said when I sat down, not making it a question. I slid the passport across the table. 2 years, old and full of stamps to places he's never mentioned. How did you know? Because men who lead double lives usually have double documentation. It's easier to maintain separate identities that way. She flipped through the passport, studying the stamps. "These align with some of the financial records you showed me. Your husband has been very busy in Central America. Did you find out where he went when he left here?" Detective Herrera's expression grew more serious. "Yes, and it's not good. News. He drove to a small airstrip outside Belize City and took a charter flight to Guatemala. But Mrs. Martinez, that's not the worst part." My stomach clenched. "What's the worst part?" "The charter service knows him. They have him in their system as a regular customer, and they have him listed under a different name. David Restrepo, not David Martinez." She paused, letting this sink in. "The flight manifest shows he was traveling with a companion, a woman named Vanessa Brooks." The name hit me like a slap. Vanessa Brooks, I know that name. From where? I closed my eyes, trying to place it. She was David's coworker, at his old job before the tech company. They worked together at a marketing firm downtown, and when he left to join his current company, he said she'd been laid off. I opened my eyes, meeting Detective Herrera's steady gaze. He said he felt bad about leaving her behind when the company downsized. When was this? About 2 years ago. Right around when? I stopped, the pieces clicking together with horrible clarity. Right around when that passport was issued. Detective Herrera nodded grimly. "I think we're beginning to understand the scope of what we're dealing with. Your husband didn't just disappear on your honeymoon, Mrs. Martinez. He's been maintaining a relationship with this woman for at least 2 years, possibly longer. The Guatemala trips, the secret finances, the separate passport. They're all part of an elaborate system he's built to support two different lives. I felt numb, like my body was protecting itself from the full impact of what I was hearing. So what does this mean? Is he planning to come back at all? I don't know yet, but I do know that you need to start protecting yourself legally and financially. If your husband is operating under multiple identities and maintaining secret relationships, there could be legal complications you haven't considered yet. What kind of complications? Detective Herrera leaned forward, her voice dropping. Mrs. Martinez, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think very carefully before you answer. In the time you've known David, has he ever asked you to sign documents you didn't fully understand? Financial papers, property transfers, anything that seemed unusual? I thought back over our relationship, trying to remember. There were some papers when we bought our condo together. David handled most of it because he said he understood real estate better than I did. And there were some tax documents last year that he said were just standard forms for married couples filing jointly. Even though you weren't married yet? The realization hit me like cold water. We weren't married yet, but he said it was just practice, getting our finances aligned for when we did get married. I looked at Detective Herrera with growing alarm. What did I sign? I don't know, but I think we need to find out. And I think we need to find out what name those documents were filed under. She closed the passport and slid it back to me. Mrs. Martinez, I'm going to be very direct with you. Based on what I've learned today, I believe your husband has been using you as part of whatever operation he's running. The timing of your marriage, the financial access he's gained, the documents you've signed, none of this feels coincidental. I sat there in the tropical evening air, surrounded by the sounds of other people enjoying their vacations, and felt my entire world reshape itself around this new reality. David hadn't just been cheating on me with Vanessa Brooks. He'd been using our relationship, our marriage, as cover for something much bigger and more calculated than simple infidelity. What do I do now? I asked, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. Now we figure out exactly what he's been doing and how deep this goes. And then we make sure he doesn't get away with it. Detective Herrera's smile was sharp. Your husband may think he's been very clever, Mrs. Martinez, but he made one crucial mistake. What's that? He underestimated his wife. The next morning brought news that changed everything again. I was having breakfast on the balcony, trying to process everything Detective Herrera had told me the night before, when my phone rang. David's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment I just stared at it, my heart hammering. Following the detective's instructions, I answered on the fourth ring, trying to sound worried, but not angry. David? Oh my God, where are you? I've been terrified. Claire, baby, I'm so sorry. His voice sounded strained, exhausted. There's been a family emergency. My cousin in Guatemala was in a serious accident, and I had to fly down immediately to help deal with the medical situation. The lie came so smoothly, so convincingly, that if I hadn't seen the evidence with my own eyes, I might have believed him. Instead, I found myself marveling at his ability to fabricate an entire crisis without missing a beat. What happened? Is she okay? I injected just the right amount of concern into my voice. She's stable now, but it was touch and go for a while. I'm sorry I couldn't call sooner. I was at the hospital and my phone died, and everything has been chaos. He sighed heavily. I feel terrible about leaving you alone on our honeymoon. I've been so worried. When are you coming back? There was a pause, just long enough to confirm what I already suspected. That's the thing, babe. The doctors say she's going to need surgery, and I'm the only family member who can make medical decisions for her. I might need to stay a few more days. A few more days, enough time for him to figure out his next move, to decide whether he was coming back. To our marriage at all, or disappearing permanently into his other life with Vanessa Brooks. Of course, I said. Family comes first. Just, please keep me updated. I miss you. I miss you too. So much. Claire, I love you, and I'm going to make this up to you when I get back. We'll extend the honeymoon, take that trip to Italy. We talked about more lies, delivered with such apparent sincerity that I wondered how many other conversations we'd had that were complete fabrications. I'd like that. I love you too. After I hung up, I immediately called Detective Herrera and relayed the conversation word for word. Her response was exactly what I expected. Cousin in Guatemala, of course. Her voice was dry. Mrs. Martinez, I have an update for you as well. I tracked down the flight he took yesterday, and I have information about where he's staying. Where? A luxury eco-resort in the rainforest outside Flores, the kind of place that caters to wealthy tourists who want privacy and don't ask too many questions. And according to the resort's records, he's been staying there regularly for the past 18 months. Always in the same suite. Always for 4 to 5 days at a time. With Vanessa? Sometimes, but not always. Mrs. Martinez, I think your husband's activities in Guatemala go beyond just maintaining a relationship with another woman. The frequency of his visits, the remote location, the pattern of cash payments I'm seeing in the resort's records. This looks like something much more organized. I thought about the $15,000 jewelry purchase, about the multiple passports, about the elaborate lies he could tell without hesitation. What kind of organized? I have some theories, but I need more evidence before I share them. What I can tell you is that we need to move quickly. If your husband is involved in illegal activities, and if he's using your marriage as cover, you could be in serious legal jeopardy. The word sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. What do you mean? I mean that if federal authorities become involved, they might view you as a conspirator rather than a victim, especially given the financial documents you've signed and the timing of your marriage. Detective Herrera's voice was gentle, but firm. We need to get ahead of this, Mrs. Martinez. We need to figure out exactly what your husband has been doing and make sure you're protected before this situation spirals out of your control. That afternoon, I made a decision that would have been unthinkable a week earlier. I booked a flight home to Portland, leaving the honeymoon suite and the paradise that had become my prison. But I wasn't running away from the truth anymore. I was going home to arm myself with it. Because David Martinez, or David Restrepo, or whoever he really was, had made the mistake of thinking I was just another mark in whatever game he was playing. He was about to learn that the woman he'd married was much stronger than the naive graphic designer he thought he'd manipulated. And when he finally came home expecting to continue his double life, I was going to be ready for him. The flight back to Portland felt like traveling through time. 12 hours earlier, I'd been Mrs. David Martinez, abandoned honeymoon wife playing the role of concerned spouse on the phone with her lying husband. Now, somewhere over Texas, I was Claire Thompson again, armed with evidence and a growing understanding that my marriage had been a carefully orchestrated fraud from the beginning. Amanda picked me up at the airport, taking one look at my face and pulling me into a fierce hug that lasted longer than usual. "You look different," she said as we walked toward baggage claim. "Stronger, but also like you've seen things you can't unsee." "That's because I have." I hefted my carry-on bag higher on my shoulder. "Amanda, this is so much worse than we thought. David isn't just cheating on me with Vanessa Brooks. I think he's been using our entire relationship as some kind of cover for illegal activities." "What kind of illegal activities?" "I don't know yet. But Detective Herrera thinks it could be anything from money laundering to artifact smuggling, the Guatemala connection, the multiple identities, the pattern of cash payments at that resort he's been staying at. None of it points to an innocent affair." Amanda was quiet for a moment as we waited for my suitcase. "Claire, I need to tell you something. After we talked yesterday, I did some digging of my own. I called Johnson, David's supposed boss at the tech company. My stomach dropped. And there is no Johnson. In fact, there's no record of David ever working for TechFlow Solutions. I called the main number, spoke to HR, even looked up their employee directory online. David Martinez doesn't exist in their system. The baggage carousel started moving, but I couldn't focus on finding my suitcase. What do you mean he doesn't work there? I mean he's been lying about his job for at least the past year, maybe longer. The company exists, but he doesn't work for them. I even drove by the office building he said he worked in. The security guard confirmed that TechFlow has a suite there, but when I described David, he had no idea who I was talking about. Felt the familiar sensation of my world tilting sideways. The same feeling I'd had when I first saw those Guatemala charges on our bank statements. So where has he been going every day? What has he been doing for money? That's what we need to figure out. Because if he's not earning a legitimate salary, where is the money coming from that's been flowing through your joint accounts? We drove through the familiar streets of Portland in relative silence, both of us processing the implications of what Amanda had discovered. When we pulled into my driveway, I looked at the modest craftsman house David and I had bought together and wondered how many other lies were hidden within its walls. I need to search the house, I said as we walked up the front steps. Really search it, the way Detective Herrera taught me to look for things. If David has been running some kind of operation, there might be evidence here. I'll help, Amanda said. Where do we start? We started with David's home office, the small converted bedroom where he supposedly handled his work for the tech company that had never heard of him. I'd rarely been in there, respecting his need for privacy and his claims that his work involved confidential client information. Now, looking at the room with suspicious eyes, I realized how strange that had always been. What marketing professional needed that level of secrecy? The desk drawers were locked, but Amanda had come prepared with a small toolkit that included lockpicks she'd learned to use during a brief rebellious phase in college. Within minutes, she had the first drawer open, revealing a collection of documents that made my blood run cold. Business registration papers for a company called Meridian Import Solutions, with David listed as the sole proprietor. Bank statements for accounts I'd never heard of, showing deposits and withdrawals in amounts that dwarfed our household income. And most damning of all, correspondence with various Central American contacts discussing shipments, delivery schedules, and payment terms for items described only as cultural artifacts and artisanal goods. Claire, Amanda said quietly, holding up a letter printed on official-looking letterhead. Look at this. The letter was from the Guatemalan Ministry of Culture, dated 6 months earlier, and it was addressed to David Restrepo. The content was formal and bureaucratic, but the meaning was clear. The ministry was investigating reports of unauthorized archaeological excavations in the Peyton region and warning that anyone found to be trafficking in stolen artifacts would face severe criminal penalties under both Guatemalan and international law. Artifact trafficking, I said, the words feeling surreal as they left my mouth. My husband is an artifact trafficker. It looks that way. And Claire, look at these bank statements. Some of these deposits are for hundreds of thousands of dollars. This isn't small-time smuggling. This is a major operation. I sank into David's desk chair, surrounded by evidence of a criminal enterprise I'd been completely oblivious to. The comfortable home office suddenly felt like the headquarters of a stranger's illegal business. And I realized that for the past 3 years, I'd been living with someone I'd never really known at all. There's more, Amanda said, continuing to search through the papers. Look at this. She handed me a manila folder containing photographs. Not family photos or vacation pictures, but professional documentation shots of ancient pottery, jade jewelry, and stone carvings. Each item was photographed against a neutral background with a small placard showing measurements and catalog numbers. At the bottom of each photo was a price notation in David's handwriting, ranging from $5,000 to $50,000 per piece. These are his inventory photos, I realized. He's been cataloging stolen artifacts like merchandise and selling them to private collectors by the looks of these emails. Amanda had moved to the filing cabinet and was pulling out printed correspondence. He's got buyers all over the world. Museums, private collectors, even some legitimate auction houses that probably don't know they're dealing in stolen goods. The scope of David's deception was staggering. Not only had he been lying about his job, his travel, and his relationship with Vanessa Brooks, but he'd been using our home as a base of operations for an international artifact smuggling ring. Every business trip, every weekend away, every time he'd claimed to be working late at the office that didn't employ him, he'd actually been building and running a criminal empire. Amanda, what if I'm already implicated in this? What if the authorities think I knew what he was doing? That's why we're documenting everything. We need to show that you were kept completely in the dark about his real activities. Amanda continued photographing documents with her phone. But Claire, there's something else we need to consider. If David is this deeply involved in illegal activities, and if he's been using your marriage as cover, what happens when he realizes you know the truth? The question sent a chill through me. David had invested years in building this elaborate cover life, and millions of dollars were flowing through his operation. If he perceived me as a threat to his freedom or his business, what lengths might he go to protect himself? I need to call Detective Herrera, I said. She needs to know what we've found. Detective Herrera answered on the first ring, as if she'd been waiting for my call. When I described what Amanda and I had discovered, in David's office, her response was immediate and alarming. Mrs. Martinez, you need to get out of that house right now. Don't pack anything. Don't try to gather more evidence. Just leave immediately. Why? What's wrong? Because I just got word from my contacts in Guatemala that David and Vanessa Brooks were detained by authorities this morning in connection with an archaeological site robbery. They were released on bail within hours, which means David has powerful connections and significant resources. If he's been operating at the level you're describing, he's not going to let a wife with evidence destroy his operation. My hands started shaking. You think he's dangerous? I think he's desperate, and desperate people who have a lot to lose can become very dangerous very quickly. Where are you staying tonight? I don't know. I hadn't thought that far ahead. Stay with your friend. Don't go back to the house until we can coordinate with local authorities to ensure your safety. And Mrs. Martinez, don't trust any communication from David. If he calls, don't answer. If he shows up wherever you're staying, call 911 immediately. After I hung up, Amanda and I quickly gathered the most incriminating documents from David's office and left the house. As we drove toward Amanda's suburban neighborhood, I called my bank and put a freeze on all our joint accounts. I called our credit card companies and reported the cards as potentially compromised. I even called our insurance company to remove David's access to our policies. With each call, I felt like I was systematically dismantling the life we'd built together, but I also felt like I was taking back control of my own existence. For 3 years, David had been making financial decisions that affected both of us, while keeping me completely ignorant of where the money was really coming from. Now, at least, I was ensuring he couldn't continue to use our shared resources to fund his criminal activities. That evening, sitting in Amanda's living room with a glass of wine and a stack of legal documents, I tried to process the magnitude of what I'd discovered. My husband was an international artifact smuggler who had used our marriage as cover for his criminal activities. He'd been systematically lying to me about every aspect of his life, from his job to his travel to his relationship with Vanessa Brooks. And now he was facing arrest in Guatemala, which meant he might never come home at all. The weird thing is, I said to Amanda, I don't even know if I want him to come home. I mean, obviously I don't want him to get away with what he's done, but the thought of seeing him again, of having to pretend I don't know what I know, it makes me feel sick. You don't have to pretend anything, Amanda said firmly. You don't owe him a performance, Claire. You don't owe him loyalty or secrecy or protection. He made his choices, and now he gets to live with the consequences. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, remembering Detective Herrera's warning about communication from David. But something made me look. Mrs. Martinez, this is Attorney Sarah Chen with the Pacific Northwest Legal Aid Society. I understand you may need representation in connection with a federal investigation involving artifact trafficking. I've been retained by Detective Herrera to ensure your rights are protected. Can we meet tomorrow morning? The reality of my situation hit me like a physical blow. I needed a lawyer. I was potentially involved in a federal investigation. My honeymoon had ended with me hiding in my best friend's house while my criminal husband was detained in a foreign country. But for the first time since David had walked out of our honeymoon suite, I didn't feel helpless. I felt angry. And I felt determined. And I felt like I was finally seeing clearly after years of living in carefully constructed fog. I'm going to destroy him, I said to Amanda, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. What do you mean? I mean I'm going to help the authorities build the strongest possible case against David and his operation. I'm going to make sure he faces consequences for every lie he told, every law he broke, every dollar he stole from archaeological sites that belonged to the people of Guatemala. I took a sip of wine, feeling a fierce satisfaction building in my chest. He thought he could use me as an unwitting accomplice in his crimes. Instead, I'm going to be the reason he gets caught. The next morning brought a phone call that changed everything again. I was having coffee with Amanda when my phone rang, showing David's name on the caller ID. Following Detective Herrera's instructions, I let it go to voicemail. But when I played the message back, David's voice sounded different than it had during our last conversation. Less controlled, more desperate. Claire, baby, I need you to listen to me very carefully. There have been some misunderstandings down here. Some legal complications that I'm working to resolve. I need you to go to my office at home and destroy certain documents before anyone else sees them. It's very important that you do this today, before I get back. I'll explain everything when I see you, but right now I need you to trust me and do exactly what I'm asking. I looked at Amanda, who had heard the entire message. He wants me to destroy the evidence we found yesterday. Which means he knows. He's in serious trouble and he's hoping you'll help him cover his tracks. Should I call him back? Let him think I'm going to do what he asked? Amanda considered this. What did Detective Herrera say about communication? Not to trust anything he said and not to answer his calls. I paused, thinking. But she didn't say anything about using his desperation against him. I called Detective Herrera and played David's voicemail for her. Her response was immediate and intense. This is perfect, Mrs. Martinez. He's essentially confessing that there are incriminating documents in his office and asking you to obstruct justice by destroying them. This gives us probable cause for a search warrant, and it demonstrates that he views you as an unknowing accomplice rather than a co-conspirator. What do you want me to do? I want you to meet with Attorney Chen this morning as planned, and then I want you to help us set a trap for your husband. Because if David is planning to come back to Portland to clean up loose ends, we're going to be ready for him. The meeting with Attorney Chen took place in a downtown office that smelled like leather and old books. Sarah Chen was a small, intense woman in her 50s with graying hair and sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She listened to my story without interruption, occasionally making notes in a legal pad, her expression growing more serious as I described the scope of David's deception. Mrs. Martinez, she said when I finished, you're in a very unusual position. On one hand, you were clearly kept ignorant of your husband's criminal activities and may have been victimized by his fraud. On the other hand, you've been married to him for less than a week, and some federal prosecutors might argue that the timing of your marriage was suspicious. What does that mean for me? It means we need to be very strategic about how we Handle your cooperation with the authorities. We want to make it clear that you're a victim and a witness, not a co-conspirator. The evidence you've gathered helps establish that you were deceived, but we need to be careful about how we present it. Detective Herrera mentioned setting a trap for David. What does that involve? Attorney Chen leaned back in her chair, considering. If your husband is planning to return to Portland to destroy evidence, law enforcement may want to monitor his activities and gather additional proof of his criminal behavior. Your cooperation could be valuable, but it would also involve some risk. What kind of risk? The risk that David might become violent if he realizes you've discovered his secrets. The risk that other people involved in his operation might view you as a threat. And the risk that, despite our best efforts, federal prosecutors might still view you as potentially complicit in his crimes. I thought about David's voicemail, about the desperation in his voice, about the 3 years of lies he'd told me with such apparent sincerity. Ms. Chen, if I don't help them catch him, if I just walk away and try to pretend none of this happened, what are the chances he gets away with everything? Given the scope of his operation and the international nature of his crimes, probably quite high. Artifact trafficking is notoriously difficult to prosecute, especially when the perpetrators have resources and connections. Then I want to help. I want him to face consequences for what he's done, not just to me, but to the people whose cultural heritage he's been stealing and selling. I met her eyes steadily. What do I need to do? Attorney Chen smiled for the first time since I'd entered her office. Mrs. Martinez, I think you're going to be a very effective witness. Let me call Detective Herrera and see how we can make your husband's homecoming as uncomfortable as possible. That afternoon, I found myself in a situation I never could have imagined a week earlier. I was sitting in a surveillance van outside my own house, wearing a wire and waiting for my criminal husband to return from Guatemala so federal agents could arrest him for international artifact trafficking. Detective Herrera sat beside me, monitoring the recording equipment and staying in contact with the agents positioned around the neighborhood. Remember, Mrs. Martinez, your job is just to act normal and let him incriminate himself. Don't try to be a detective. Don't push him to confess. Just be the concerned wife who's worried about the legal troubles he mentioned and let him tell you whatever story he's prepared. What if he suspects something? Then you leave immediately. Your safety is more important than any evidence we might gather. She adjusted the small microphone clip to the inside of my shirt. But based on his voicemail, I think he's desperate. Enough to believe that you're still the naive wife who doesn't ask difficult questions. My phone buzzed with a text from David. Landing in Portland in 2 hours. Meet me at the house. We have a lot to talk about. I showed the message to Detective Herrera, who nodded grimly. He's coming home. Are you ready for this? I thought about the past week, about the transformation from blissful newlywed to federal witness, about the lies and betrayal and criminal conspiracy I'd been unknowingly living with for 3 years. I'm ready. As I walked up the front steps of the house I'd thought was my home, I realized that the woman who had left for her honeymoon a week ago no longer existed. In her place was someone harder, someone who understood that love without truth was just another form of exploitation, someone who was willing to fight for justice even when it meant destroying the life she'd thought she wanted. David had no idea what was waiting for him inside. But he was about to find out that the wife he'd been manipulating was much stronger than he'd ever imagined. The sound of David's key in the front door made my heart race, but not with the anticipation I'd felt so many times before. I was sitting on our living room couch, the same spot where we'd planned our honeymoon just 2 weeks earlier, but everything felt different now. The federal agents were positioned throughout the neighborhood, Detective Herrera was monitoring from the surveillance van, and I was wearing a wire that would capture every lie David was about to tell me. Claire? His voice carried from the guillemot entryway, and I could hear the exhaustion in it. Baby, are you here? In the living room, I called back, working to keep my voice steady and normal. The woman who had left for Belize a week ago would have rushed to the door, thrown her arms around him, demanded to know if he was okay. The woman sitting on this couch now stayed exactly where she was. David appeared in the doorway, and I was shocked by how different he looked. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his clothes wrinkled and stained, and there were dark circles under his eyes that made him look older than his 32 years. But it was his expression that really caught my attention. He looked hunted, desperate, like someone who was running out of options. "Thank God you're safe," he said, crossing the room quickly and pulling me into a tight hug. For a moment, muscle memory almost made me relax into his embrace, but then I remembered the photographs of stolen artifacts in his office, the fake job he'd been pretending to go to for over a year, the $15,000 jewelry purchase, for another woman. I hugged him back stiffly, playing the role of the confused wife rather than the informed adversary. "David, what happened? Your texts were so vague, and when you didn't come back to the resort." I pulled away to look at him, letting genuine worry show in my voice. "I was terrified something had happened to you. I know, and I'm so sorry. This whole situation got out of hand so quickly." He sat heavily on the couch beside me, running, his hands through his hair. "My cousin's accident was worse than I initially thought, and then there were complications with the insurance, and the hospital needed someone to guarantee payment for her surgery." The lie came so easily, so smoothly, that I found myself marveling at his skill. If I hadn't seen the evidence with my own eyes, if I didn't know about Vanessa Brooks and the detention in Guatemala and the years of artifact trafficking, I might have believed every word. "Is she going to be okay?" I asked, playing along with his fiction. "She's stable now, but it was touch and go for a while. Claire, I need to tell you something, and it's going to sound crazy, but I need you to trust me." He took my hands in his, and I had to resist the urge to pull away. There were some legal complications while I was down there. Some kind of mix-up with customs and immigration that got blown out of proportion. "What kind of mix-up?" David's jaw tightened slightly, and I could see him calculating how much truth to mix with his lies. "Someone at the airport thought I was carrying items I shouldn't have been carrying. Souvenirs from the hospital gift shop for you, actually. But they treated it like I was some kind of smuggler." "Smuggling what?" "Allegedly cultural artifacts. It's complete nonsense, of course, but the authorities down there are very sensitive about that kind of thing. They held me for questioning, for hours before they realized they had the wrong person." He squeezed my hands. "But Claire, this could still cause problems for me here in the States. There might be federal agents who want to ask questions, maybe even search our house." I felt a cold satisfaction wash over me. He was setting up his defense, trying to frame his arrest and the eventual discovery of his operation as a case of mistaken identity. But he was also giving me exactly the kind of incriminating statements the federal agents needed to hear. "Search our house? David, why would they do that?" "Because they're fishing, trying to build a case against someone who isn't me. Baby, this is very important. If anyone comes here asking questions, you need to be very careful about what you say. Don't volunteer information. Don't let them search anything without a warrant. And call Attorney Chen immediately." My blood went cold. "Who's Attorney Chen?" David caught his mistake immediately, but it was too late. "I mean, we should probably get a lawyer. I heard good things about someone named Chen." "You said call Attorney Chen immediately, like you already knew her. David, do you already have a lawyer?" I could see the panic flicker across his face before he forced a smile. "I'm just stressed, Claire. I misspoke. The point is, we need to be prepared for the possibility that this mess in Guatemala might follow me home." "What exactly are you afraid they're going to find if they search our house?" The question hung in the air between us, and I watched David's mind work furiously to come up with an answer that wouldn't incriminate him further. Finally, he settled on deflection. Nothing, because there's nothing to find. But you know how these federal investigations work. They tear apart people's lives looking for evidence that doesn't exist, and even innocent people can get caught up in the machinery. I nodded as if I believed him, but inside I was thinking about the filing cabinets full of smuggling correspondence, the inventory photographs of stolen artifacts, the business registration for Meridian Import Solutions. David was right that a federal search would tear apart our life, but not because the agents were fishing for non-existent evidence. "There's something else," David said, his voice dropping to a more serious tone. "I need you to do something for me, and I need you to do it tonight." "What?" "I need you to go through my office and remove any documents that might be misinterpreted by federal agents. Financial records, business correspondence, anything that could be taken out of context." "You want me to destroy evidence?" "I want you to protect our privacy. Claire, some of my work involves confidential client information that could be compromised if it falls into the wrong hands. This isn't about hiding anything illegal, it's about protecting legitimate business interests." I stared at him, amazed by his ability to reframe obstruction of justice as protecting client confidentiality. "What kind of documents are you talking about?" "Just papers in my filing cabinet, bank statements for some business accounts, correspondence with international clients, things like that. Nothing important to our personal life, but things that could be twisted to look suspicious if someone wanted to build a case against me." "David, this sounds like you're asking me to obstruct a federal investigation." His expression hardened slightly, and for the first time since he'd come home, I caught a glimpse of someone I didn't recognize. Someone calculating and dangerous. "I'm asking my wife to protect her husband from a legal system that destroys innocent people every day. Claire, if you love me, if you trust me, you'll do this one thing for me without asking questions." The emotional manipulation was so blatant, so textbook, that I almost laughed. Instead, I nodded slowly. "Of course I'll help you. I just want to understand what I'm dealing with." The relief on his face was immediate and complete. "Thank you. You have no idea how much this means to me." He kissed my forehead gently. "I'm going to take a shower and try to get some sleep. I haven't slept in days. Can you take care of the office tonight?" "Sure. Should I bring you the documents when I'm done? Or just destroy them?" "Just destroy them. Burn them in the backyard. Fire pit if you have to. The important thing is that they're gone before anyone comes looking for them." After David went upstairs, I sat on the couch for several minutes, processing what had just happened. My husband had returned from Guatemala, lied to my face about every aspect of his trip, and then asked me to destroy evidence in a federal investigation, all while claiming to be the innocent victim of a misunderstanding. But more than that, he'd revealed something about himself that I'd never seen before. When I'd questioned his requests, when I'd pushed back even slightly, his mask had slipped. The charming, considerate man I'd married was just a performance, and underneath it was someone who expected compliance without question. I walked slowly to David's office, knowing that federal agents were watching the house and recording everything through the wire I was wearing. The documents I'd found yesterday were still exactly where Amanda and I had left them, and I photographed several new pieces of correspondence that I'd missed during our initial search. One letter, dated just 2 weeks before our wedding, was particularly damning. It was from a private collector in Switzerland, confirming the purchase of a Mayan's jade burial mask for $250,000. The letter praised David's ability to source unique pieces with impeccable provenance documentation and promised referrals to other collectors interested in discreet acquisitions. Another document was even more chilling. It was a handwritten note from someone identified only as V, discussing logistics for an upcoming excavation. The note mentioned bribing local officials, hiring workers who wouldn't ask questions about proper archaeological procedures, and shipping timelines for getting artifacts out of Guatemala before authorities became suspicious. I realized that V was almost certainly Vanessa Brooks, and that she wasn't just David's girlfriend. She was his partner in the smuggling operation, someone with knowledge of archaeological sites and the connections necessary to carry out illegal excavations. As I photographed each document, I thought about David upstairs, probably lying in our bed planning his next move. Did he really think I was naive enough to destroy evidence of international crimes? Did he believe that a few manipulative words about trust and love would make me complicit in artifact trafficking? My phone buzzed with a text from Detective Herrera. Outstanding work. We have everything we need. Extraction in 30 minutes. I looked around the office one more time, thinking about all the evenings David had spent in here, supposedly working late on marketing campaigns while he was actually running a criminal enterprise. How many stolen artifacts had been sold from this room? How many archaeological sites had been damaged to feed his operation? But as I turned to leave, I heard footsteps on the stairs. David was coming back down much sooner than I'd expected. I quickly closed the filing cabinet and moved toward the door, but I wasn't fast enough. "How's it going?" he asked, appearing in the doorway. His hair was wet from the shower, and he was wearing fresh clothes, but his eyes were sharp and alert. Not the eyes of someone who was planning to sleep. "I'm just getting started," I said. "There are more documents than I expected." "What kind of documents?" Something in his tone made me cautious. "Business correspondence, like you said, some financial records. I was just trying to organize them before I start destroying anything." David stepped into the room and looked around, his gaze lingering on the filing cabinet. "Did you find anything interesting?" "Like what?" "I don't know. Anything that seemed unusual or confusing." I realized he was testing me, trying to determine whether I'd actually read any of the documents or just planned to destroy them without looking. Nothing I understood. A lot of it seems to be about importing art or antiques from Central America. "Is that what your business does?" "Something like that." He moved closer to the desk, and I noticed his demeanor had changed completely. The exhausted, desperate man who had walked through my front door an hour earlier was gone. In his place was someone focused and predatory. "Claire, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth." "Okay. When you were in Belize, did you talk to anyone about my trip to Guatemala? Resort staff? Other guests? Anyone?" My mouth went dry. "I talked to the concierge when I was looking for you, and I called your office to see if there really was an emergency." "What did they tell you?" "The concierge said you'd rented a car. Your office said they'd never heard of you." David's expression didn't change, but I saw his hands clench into fists. "Did you talk to anyone else? Any authorities or investigators?" I realized that he knew. Somehow he'd figured out that I'd discovered his lies and hired Detective Herrera. Maybe someone in Guatemala had told him about her investigation, or maybe he'd just put together the pieces when I'd asked too many questions tonight. "David, you're scaring me. What's this about?" "It's about protecting our marriage and our future. Claire, there are people who want to destroy me, who want to take everything we've built together. If you've been talking to the wrong people, if you've been manipulated into believing lies about me, we need to fix this now, before it's too late." "I don't understand what you're talking about." "I think you do." He moved between me and the B door, blocking my exit from the office. "I think someone has been filling your head with stories about illegal activities and criminal investigations. I think you've been convinced that your husband is someone he's not." My heart was racing. Now, both from fear and from anger, even caught red-handed, even facing the collapse of his entire operation, David was still trying to manipulate me, still trying to make me doubt my own judgment and trust his lies over the evidence I'd seen with my own eyes. "David, I want to go to bed. We can talk about this tomorrow." "No, I think we need to talk about this now. I think we need to clear the air about what you know and who you've been talking to." His voice was still calm, still reasonable, but there was something underneath it that made my skin crawl. Because, Claire, I've invested too much in this marriage to let a misunderstanding destroy it. I realized that he wasn't talking about emotional investment. He was talking about the criminal operation that our marriage had been designed to protect. The fake identity I'd helped establish by signing documents I didn't understand. The financial cover our joint accounts had provided for his money laundering. The respectable facade my ignorance had given to his illegal activities. I also realized that I was in serious danger. David had spent 3 years lying to me with perfect composure, running a multi-million-dollar criminal enterprise while playing the role of devoted boyfriend and husband. If he was willing to destroy archaeological sites and steal irreplaceable cultural artifacts for money, what might he be willing to do to a wife who threatened his freedom? "You're right," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We should talk about this." "But David, I'm scared. You're acting like someone I don't know." "Maybe that's because you've never really known me at all." The words hit me like a slap, not because they were cruel, but because they were finally honest. For the first time since he'd walked back into our house, David was telling me the truth. I had never known him. The man I'd fallen in love with, the man I'd married, the man I'd planned a future with was a carefully constructed fiction designed to serve his criminal purposes. "Who are you then?" I asked. "If I don't know you, tell me who you really are." David smiled, and it was the coldest expression I'd ever seen on his face. "I'm someone who takes what he wants and doesn't ask permission. I'm someone who saw an opportunity in a naive graphic designer who was so desperate to be loved that she'd sign anything I put in front of her. I'm someone who built an operation that generates more money in a month than you'll see in your entire lifetime. By stealing artifacts that belong to the people of Guatemala. By giving rich collectors access to art that would otherwise sit in the ground being useful to no one. Claire, those pieces I sell are going to people who appreciate them, who preserve them, who understand their value. I'm not destroying culture. I'm sharing it with the world." The self-serving rationalization was so absurd that I almost laughed. "You're a thief, David. You steal irreplaceable cultural artifacts and sell them to private collectors who hide them away from the people they actually belong to. And you're an accessory to everything I've done for the past 3 years. Your signature is on the business registration for Meridian Import Solutions. Your name is on the bank accounts that have laundered millions of dollars in artifact sales. Your tax returns show income from sources you never questioned." His smile widened. "So even if you wanted to turn me in, which you won't, you'd be destroying yourself in the process." I felt the wire against my chest and remembered that federal agents were positioned around the house, recording every word of David's confession. He thought he was threatening me into silence, but he was actually providing law enforcement with everything they needed to convict him. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "I want you to forget everything you think you've learned about my business. I want you to destroy those documents like I asked. And I want you to remember that we're married, which means we're partners in everything, including the consequences if this operation gets exposed." "And if I say no?" David's expression hardened completely, and for the first time I saw the man who could orchestrate the destruction of archaeological sites and the theft of priceless cultural artifacts. "Then I'll make sure you face the same federal charges I do." "Claire, you're not the innocent victim you think you are. You've been my accomplice for 3 years, whether you knew it or not. The only question now is whether you're going to be my willing accomplice going forward." I heard the sound of vehicles pulling up outside, and David heard it too. His head snapped toward the window and his face went pale as he realized what was happening. "You called them," he said, his voice filled with disbelief. "You actually called the federal agents." "No, David. You called them when you confessed to everything while I was wearing a wire." The look of shock and betrayal on his face would have been funny if it hadn't been so revealing. Even now, even caught in an elaborate criminal conspiracy, he was outraged that I'd had the audacity to fight back against his manipulation and lies. The front door burst open, and I heard Detective Herrera's voice shouting, "Federal agents!" David lunged toward me, but I was already moving toward the window, toward the agents who were surrounding the house, toward the end of 3 years of living with a man who had never existed at all. As they handcuffed David in our living room, he looked at me with pure hatred. "You have no idea what you've just done to yourself, Claire. This isn't over." But I knew it was over. The marriage was over, the lies were over, and David's criminal empire was over. As I watched them lead him away, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete clarity about who I was and what I was worth. For the first time since, I'd said "I do" to a man who'd been deceiving me from the moment we met. I was finally free. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my new apartment, sunlight streaming through windows that actually belonged to me, watching the morning news, while my coffee brewed. The lead story was about David's sentencing hearing, scheduled for later that week. The anchorwoman's voice was professional and detached as she described the charges: international artifact trafficking, money laundering, conspiracy to commit theft of cultural property, and fraud. The recommended sentence was 12 to 15 years in federal prison. I turned off the television and carried my coffee to the small balcony overlooking downtown Portland. From here, I could see the river and the bridges that connected one side of the city to the other, and I found something deeply satisfying about that view. Connections that were solid, built on actual foundations, designed to last. Nothing like the elaborate construction of lies that had been my marriage. My phone buzzed with a text from Amanda. "Lunch today? I have news about the civil settlement." The civil case had been almost as complex as the criminal prosecution. Once the federal investigation revealed the full scope of David's operation, it turned out that dozens of museums, galleries, and private collectors had unknowingly purchased stolen artifacts through his network. The Guatemalan government had filed suit to recover the pieces, and there was a separate class action case from archaeological organizations seeking damages for the destruction of excavation sites. But the part that affected me most directly was the lawsuit David had filed against me from prison, claiming that I had been a knowing participant in his business and therefore owed him half of any proceeds from the sale of our shared assets. His lawyer argued that my signatures on various documents proved I had been aware of the true nature of his work, and that my cooperation with federal agents had been motivated by greed rather than ignorance. It was a final insult, a last desperate attempt to drag me down with him even after everything he'd done. But Attorney Chen had been confident from the beginning that the case was without merit, and the evidence we'd gathered supported my claims of deception and manipulation. "Great news," Amanda said when we met at our usual cafe an hour later. "Chen called this morning. The judge threw out David's lawsuit completely. Not only that, but he's ordered David to pay your legal fees and issued a restraining order preventing him from contacting you directly or through third parties." I felt a weight lift from my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I was carrying. "So it's really over?" "The legal part is over. David can't touch you financially, and once he's sentenced next week, he'll be out of your life for at least a decade." Amanda reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "How does it feel?" I thought about it, really considered the question. 6 months ago, I'd been a woman who defined herself through her relationship with a man who had never really existed. I'd been so desperate to be loved that I'd ignored red flags, accepted lies, and signed documents without reading them. I'd built my entire sense of self around being David's girlfriend, then David's fiancée, then David's wife. "It feels like I can breathe again," I said finally. "Like I've been holding my breath for 3 years and didn't realize it until I could finally exhale." "Any regrets about how you handled things?" "You mean, do I regret helping federal agents arrest my criminal husband on our honeymoon aftermath?" I laughed. "Not for a second. David made his choices long before I found out about them. All I did was refuse to be complicit in covering them up." The truth was, I'd spent months in therapy processing not just David's betrayal, but my own role in enabling his deception. Dr. Patricia Williams, a specialist in psychological manipulation and trauma, had helped me understand how people like David operated, how they identified targets who were vulnerable to their particular brand of control. "You weren't weak or stupid," Dr. Williams had told me during one of our early sessions. "You were isolated and looking for connection, which made you susceptible to someone who was skilled at creating the illusion of intimacy while maintaining complete emotional control. David didn't love you, Claire. He studied you, learned your vulnerabilities, and exploited them for his own purposes." It had taken months of work to truly internalize that understanding, to stop blaming myself for not seeing through David's lies sooner. But gradually, I'd come to recognize that the qualities David had exploited, my desire for partnership, my willingness to trust, my capacity for loyalty, weren't flaws to be ashamed of. They were strengths that had been weaponized against me by someone who lacked the basic human capacity for authentic connection. "I have something else to tell you," Amanda said, pulling me back to the present. "I've been debating whether to mention this, but I think you should know. I ran into Mrs. Patterson at the grocery store yesterday." Mrs. Patterson had been our elderly neighbor, a sweet woman who had always asked about David and me with genuine interest in our relationship. After David's arrest, she'd been one of the few people who'd expressed concern for my well-being, rather than morbid curiosity about the scandal. She said someone had been asking questions about you around the neighborhood. A woman, probably in her 30s, well-dressed, claiming to be a journalist working on a story about victims of financial fraud. I felt a familiar chill. "What kind of questions?" "About your daily routine, where you work now, whether you've been dating anyone." Mrs. Patterson didn't give her any information, but she was concerned enough to mention it. "Did she get a description of the woman?" "Blonde, expensive clothes, driving a silver BMW. She introduced herself as Rebecca Martinez." Amanda paused meaningfully. "Which is interesting, considering that's the name David used to use when he traveled with Vanessa Brooks." Vanessa Brooks. I'd almost forgotten about her in the chaos of David's arrest and trial. She'd been detained with David in Guatemala, but had been released when her lawyer proved she was a U.S. citizen who had been manipulated by David's promises of legitimate archaeological work. The prosecution had offered her immunity in exchange for her testimony against David, and she'd provided crucial evidence about the locations of illegal excavations and the network of buyers David had cultivated. But the idea that she was now investigating my life, using David's fake name to gather information about my daily routine, sent ice through my veins. "I need to call Detective Herrera," I said, pulling out my phone. Detective Herrera took my call immediately, and her response was swift and serious. "Mrs. Thompson, you need to vary your routine starting today. Don't go home alone, don't follow predictable patterns, and call me immediately if you see anyone following you or asking questions about you." "Do you think Vanessa is a threat?" "I think she's someone who lost a lot when David's operation collapsed, and she might blame you for that loss. She also knows things about David's business that we never recovered. Hidden assets, international contacts, maybe even artifacts that are still unaccounted for. If she thinks you have access to that information, or if she's angry about David's conviction, she could be very dangerous. But I don't have access to anything. I testified about what I found in David's office, but the federal agents seized everything. Rational people would understand that. But Vanessa Brooks isn't operating rationally if she's stalking you 6 months after David's arrest. I'm going to have patrol units increase their presence in your area, and I want you to consider staying with Amanda until we can locate Vanessa and determine what she wants." That evening, I sat in Amanda's guest room, looking through the box of personal items I'd salvaged from the house I'd shared with David. Most of our belongings had been sold to pay legal fees and restitution, but I'd been allowed to keep a few, things that had been mine before our relationship. Among them was a leather journal I'd kept during our first year together, filled with sketches and notes about graphic design projects, but also observations about David that I'd recorded without, really thinking about their significance. Reading through it now, with the benefit of hindsight and therapy, I could see the pattern of manipulation that had been invisible to me at the time. David says I work too much and should focus more on our relationship, I'd written after he'd criticized me for taking on a freelance project that would have increased my income and professional network. He's probably right. Balance is important. David thinks I should save money by canceling my gym membership and running with him instead, read another entry. It would be nice to have more shared activities. Page after page documented the gradual isolation David had orchestrated, always framed as suggestions for improvement or opportunities for us to spend more time together. He'd systematically cut me off from independent sources of income, social connections, and activities that might have given me confidence or perspective outside our relationship. But as I read through the journal, I also found evidence of the woman I'd been before David and glimpses of the woman I was becoming again. Early entries showed someone with clear professional goals, strong friendships, and a sense of humor about dating and relationships. Later entries, even in the midst of David's manipulation, showed someone who occasionally questioned his logic or pushed back against his suggestions. David got upset when I mentioned wanting to take that photography class I'd written about 6 months into our relationship. He said it was a waste of money, and I should focus on developing skills that would benefit both of us. But I still want to take it. Maybe I'll surprise him and sign up anyway. I remembered that photography class. David had convinced me not to take it by planning elaborate date nights during the class times, making it logistically impossible for me to attend. But the fact that I'd wanted to take it, that I'd recognized his objection as unreasonable, showed that some part of me had been fighting against his control even when I didn't understand what was happening. My phone rang, interrupting my trip down memory lane. The caller ID showed Detective Herrera's number. "We found Vanessa Brooks," she said without preamble. "She's been staying at a hotel near the airport under a fake name, and she had a significant amount of cash with her, along with what appear to be stolen artifacts that weren't recovered during our original investigation." "What does that mean?" "It means she's been operating independently since David's arrest, probably trying to liquidate remaining inventory from their operation. It also means she's been funding her activities, including her surveillance of you, with money from continuing criminal activity." "Is she in custody?" "She is now. We arrested her this afternoon on charges related to the artifacts we found in her possession. But Claire, there's something else you need to know. We found detailed notes about your daily routine, photographs of you leaving your apartment and going to work, and what appears to be a plan to approach you directly." My blood ran cold. "Approach me how?" "She was planning to pose as a victim of David's fraud, someone who had lost money in his operation, and wanted to compare notes with you about recovering assets. The plan was apparently to gain your trust, and then convince you to help her access bank accounts or property that she believed you had knowledge of. But I don't have knowledge of anything like that." "We know that, but Vanessa doesn't. She seems to believe that David must have shared information with you about hidden assets, or that you have access to accounts the federal investigation missed. She was prepared to spend weeks building a relationship with you to get that information." I thought about how easily I'd been manipulated by David, how his patient, long-term approach had made his lies seem so believable. The idea that Vanessa had been planning to use the same tactics, to exploit my trauma and isolation to gain my trust, made me feel sick. "Detective Herrera, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you think I'm naive? Do you think I'm the kind of person who's always going to be vulnerable to people like David and Vanessa?" There was a long pause before she answered. "Mrs. Thompson, I've been investigating fraud and manipulation cases for over 15 years. I've seen hundreds of victims, and the vast majority of them were intelligent, successful people who were targeted specifically because they had qualities that made them valuable to criminals. Empathy, loyalty, financial resources, professional connections? That doesn't answer my question. The fact that you're asking that question tells me you're not naive anymore. Naive people don't recognize manipulation when they see it, don't ask for help when they're in danger, and don't have the courage to fight back against people who are trying to control them. You did all of those things, Claire? You're not the same person David targeted 3 years ago. After we hung up, I sat in Amanda's guest room thinking about the woman I'd been when I first met David, and the woman I was now. The differences were striking, but not in the ways I'd expected. I wasn't harder or more cynical, though I was certainly more aware of red flags in relationships. I wasn't less trusting, though I was more careful about who earned that trust and how. The biggest change was in how I saw myself. For 3 years, I'd defined my worth through David's approval, measuring my success by how well I could anticipate and meet his needs. Now, I defined my worth through my own achievements, my own choices, my own capacity for growth and healing. My new apartment was small, but entirely mine. I'd chosen every piece of furniture, every paint color, every decorative object based on my own preferences, rather than someone else's vision of how I should live. My bank accounts were in my name only, and I knew exactly how much money I had and where it came from. My social calendar included friends David had never met, activities he'd never influenced, and plans he'd never sabotaged. Most importantly, I'd learned to trust my own judgment. When something felt wrong, I investigated instead of explaining it away. When someone's words didn't match their actions, I paid attention to the discrepancy instead of making excuses for them. When I felt uncomfortable or pressured, I listened to those feelings instead of dismissing them as oversensitivity. Dr. Williams had warned me that recovery from psychological manipulation wasn't linear, that I might experience setbacks or moments of doubt about my own perceptions. But as the months passed, I found myself becoming more confident in my ability to navigate relationships and situations without being controlled or deceived. 3 days later, I attended David's sentencing hearing. I hadn't planned to go, but Attorney Chen thought it might provide closure, and I found that I wanted to see him face the consequences of his actions in person. The courtroom was packed with journalists, federal agents, and representatives from the Guatemalan government. David sat at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit, his hair shorter than I'd ever seen it, his face thinner and more gaunt than I remembered. When he turned to scan the gallery, his eyes found mine, and for a moment we stared at each other across the space that now separated our lives. I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no residual attraction or affection. Looking at David was like looking at a stranger, someone I might have passed on the street without recognition. The man I'd thought I'd married had never existed, and the man sitting in that courtroom was someone I'd never really known. The judge's sentence was harsh but fair. 14 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release and full restitution to the Guatemalan government and affected museums. David showed no emotion as the sentence was read, but his lawyer made a final statement requesting leniency based on David's cooperation with ongoing investigations into international artifact trafficking networks. After the hearing, I walked out of the courthouse into bright afternoon sunlight, feeling like I was stepping out of the last shadow David would ever cast over my life. Detective Herrera caught up with me on the steps. "How do you feel?" She asked. "Free," I said, and meant it completely. "What's next for you?" I thought about the question. In the past 6 months, I'd rebuilt my graphic design business, focusing on clients who appreciated my work and treated me with respect. I'd reconnected with old friends and made new ones who knew nothing about David or the scandal that had ended. My marriage. I'd started dating again, slowly and carefully, with a much clearer sense of what I wanted in a partner and what behaviors I wouldn't tolerate. "I'm thinking about taking that photography class I wanted to take 3 years ago," I said, "and maybe planning a trip to Italy. Alone this time, so I can actually see what I want to see." Detective Herrera smiled. That sounds like a good plan. As I walked to my car, I thought about the woman who had woken up in a Belize honeymoon, sweet a year ago, confused and heartbroken by her husband's disappearance. She had no idea that his betrayal would lead to the discovery of an international criminal operation, or that she would find the strength to help bring him to justice. She couldn't have imagined that losing the life she thought she wanted would lead to finding the life she actually needed. That woman had been afraid of being alone, terrified that without David's love and approval, she might discover she wasn't worth very much at all. But the woman driving home from David's sentencing had learned something much more valuable, that her worth had never depended on anyone else's recognition or validation. It had always been there, waiting for her to claim it. My phone buzzed with a text from Amanda. "Dinner tonight? I'm making that pasta you love, and I want to hear everything about the sentencing." I typed back quickly, "Yes. And Amanda, thank you for everything." "That's what friends are for," she responded. "See you at 7. Friends, real ones, who supported me without expecting anything in return, who celebrated my victories and helped me through my struggles, who saw me clearly and loved me anyway." David had tried to isolate me from those relationships, and I'd let him, thinking that romantic love was more important than friendship. Now I understood that all love was important, that the people who showed up for you consistently were precious, regardless of the form their affection took. That evening, sitting in Amanda's kitchen while she cooked and told me about her latest work projects, I realized that this was happiness. Not the desperate, anxious joy I'd felt during the good moments with David, when I was constantly worried about maintaining his approval. This was contentment, peace, the quiet satisfaction of being exactly where I belonged with people who valued me for who I actually was. My phone sat on the counter, silent and unmonitored. I wasn't waiting for anyone to call or text, wasn't checking social media to see if anyone had noticed me, wasn't calculating how long I should wait before responding to messages to seem appropriately busy, but not disinterested. I was just present, engaged in conversation with my best friend, planning a future that belonged entirely to me. Later that night, as I got ready for bed in my own apartment, I caught sight of myself in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at me was someone I was still getting to know, but someone I genuinely liked. She had laugh lines from real humor, not performative smiles designed to please difficult men. She had confidence in her posture, not the defensive hunching of someone constantly braced for criticism. She had peace in her expression, not the anxious tension of someone living a lie. I thought about David, probably lying in a prison cell, planning his appeals and still believing that he was the victim of an unfair system rather than the architect of his own downfall. I thought about Vanessa, facing her own criminal charges, and probably still convinced that I had somehow stolen the life she thought she deserved. Both of them were trapped in narratives of resentment and self-pity, unable to accept responsibility for the choices that had led them to where they were. But I was free. Free from their manipulation, free from their anger, free from the elaborate fiction that had been my marriage. I had rebuilt my life on a foundation of truth, surrounded myself with people who knew and loved the real me, and learned to trust my own judgment about who deserved access to my heart. Tomorrow, I would wake, up in my own bed, in my own home, and make my own decisions about how to spend my time and energy. I would work on projects that challenged and fulfilled me, spend time with people who added value to my life, and pursue interests that brought me joy. I would continue healing from the trauma of David's betrayal, but I would do it as a whole person, not a broken one. The honeymoon was over, but the real life was just beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.